At the turn of the 20th century, there was a man named Alfred. And he was one of the prominent scientists and entrepreneurs of the day. And he made his fortune by inventing and refining explosives. His most famous invention was dynamite. And his intentions were that these explosives would be used for construction purposes. Building highways, laying foundations for buildings, stuff like that. But their value in warfare became evident, and most of Alfred's money was made selling his material and his devices to the military. Toward the end of his life, or as I think about my own life, I look at myself as I'm on the back nine. It's a term my dad always used to use. Alfred stopped thinking about his future. He started thinking about his legacy, as many of us do when we're on the back nine. And while his inventions were meant for good, he had used them for good, it was also true that his inventions had equipped armies around the world to deliver new and improved forms of death and destruction. So he thought, is that how I want to be remembered? No. So Alfred rewrote his will and used the bulk of his fortune to establish a series of international awards that were given each year to scientists and thinkers and leaders who had made a huge contributed to the betterment of humankind. And that man's name was Alfred Nobel. And the most famous words given today and given yesterday to people, to individuals who created peace. And this is the quote from his, the sort of the mission statement of the Nobel Peace Prize. Who shall have done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition, or reduction of standing armies, for the promotion of peace? And so we have the Nobel Peace Prize, one of the highest honors bestowed on a human being right now. First Nobel Peace Prize went to a guy named Jean-Henri Dunant. He was a Swiss man that helped found the International Red Cross and the Geneva Convention. That was back in 1901. In recent years, the Peace Prize was given to people like Mother Teresa for her work on behalf of the world's poor. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, human rights advocate, a guy named Nelson Mandela, we might have heard of him, for his work on dismantling apartheid in South Africa. There was a president of South Korea for his fight for human rights throughout East Asia. Like all awards that are given, though, sometimes the real meaning gets a bit dismantled over time. Most of these individuals used their minds, their talents, their influence to advance the cause of world peace, to build a better world. That was their goal. But after reading through the list, one fact remains, and it's unsettling. We're no closer to world peace than we were 100 years ago. In fact, today in our country, it almost seems like we're worse. You know, last week Pete said something, and I 100% agree with it. He said he wished he could take the hurt of people away, but that's not the way life works. And isn't that the truth? Our world is violent, it's volatile, it's a frightening place at times. And that's just a fact. And peace is always something we're reaching for. It's elusive. And you almost get it, and then it seems to disappear. So what exactly did Jesus mean when he said, the nerve of him, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God? He makes it sound like it's really possible that human beings can bring about peace between people and nations. And we just rattled off the names of some brilliant and powerful and dedicated men and women in the world over the course of the last 100 years, and their best efforts, they have brought us no closer to world peace. If they couldn't do it with all their brain power, with all their influence, with all their dedication, how can ordinary people like you and I bring peace, make peace in this world? Peacemaking begins with a change of heart. Who are the peacemakers? And Jesus is saying, first, let's notice what Jesus didn't say. He didn't say, blessed are the peaceful. We all like to be peaceful, don't we? We all like to get a good night's sleep. Peace of mind is a wonderful thing. Peacemaking often begins with that kind of inner peace, but Jesus wasn't pronouncing a blessing on peaceful people. Secondly, Jesus didn't say, blessed are the peaceable. Peaceable people, they kind of don't let things bother them. They're, to use a phrase that I've heard my kids say, they're very chill. Everybody likes peaceable people, but let's face it, they don't really often change the world. Third, Jesus didn't say, blessed are the peace-loving. We love peace. We prefer it when people and nations get along with each other. We want that. But there's more to making peace than avoiding conflict. Peace-loving is good, but it's just not enough. Jesus didn't say, blessed are the peaceful, or the peaceable, or the peace-loving. He said, blessed are the peacemakers. It's an active word. It implies initiative, invention, action. You know what? It implies risk. That could be a scary thing. Peacemaking is not for cowards. Peacemakers are often, and hear me on this, they're often misunderstood and underappreciated. Sometimes they get caught in the crossfire. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even sometimes they're looked at as the bad guy or the bad girl. And we tend to think of peace as the opposite of war or the absence of conflict. There was a cynic once observed, and he said, peace is the pause that gives nations time to reload. Well, I say this. Peace is the pause that gives people the time to reload. We take that moment that we have when there's that pause and we reload. Not our gun, but our mind, with how we're going to fire back. How we're going to shoot back at this person. We're not thinking about peace. We're thinking about, I need to win this argument. It's verbal ammunition against the other person. But when Jesus uses the word peace here, he has in mind the Old Testament idea of peace. And it's captured in the Hebrew word shalom. Shalom. Shalom, it seems from Scripture, is one of God's favorite words. It appears 250 times in the Old Testament. And it's the promise, and it has a great benediction, and many of you have heard it, right? May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you his peace. Shalom is much more than just the absence of conflict. Shalom means the wholeness, the wellness of God's peace living in your heart. We sang about it. To experience shalom means to be in harmony with God, in harmony with other people. It's global, it's personal, it's vertical. It's between people and God, and it's horizontal, meaning relationships with other people. Isn't that amazing? It's vertical. It's horizontal. What is that? That's the cross. And shalom means everything is in order, everything is as it should be, and it essentially, in the Old Testament, it's a word for salvation. It's to be rightly related with God and others. Isn't that beautiful? Rightly related with God and others. There's that cross again. His peace flows through us to others. That means it leaks. His peace leaks through us to other people. Peacemakers then are those who are actively and effectively extending God's shalom, his peace, to the world around them. They spread the tent of God's blessing wider and wider, so that more and more people come under its shade, where they find peace with God and they find peace with others. Being a peacemaker means having a reaching heart. People with reaching hearts, they're not satisfied simply with just enjoying God's shalom themselves. They want to extend it to others. So what did Jesus do? Not what would Jesus do. What did Jesus do? We can't really point to any one specific instance in which Jesus was a peacemaker. I don't have a specific passage because here's the deal. Jesus was always doing it all the time. It's what he was doing every moment. Peacemaking. First, Jesus was always noticing people. He recognized their needs, and he recognized their inner beauty. A widow on her way to a cemetery to bury her only son, a blind man on the side of the road, a man with a withered hand in a crowd, children who were eager to be blessed, a sinful woman who just needed to be loved, these blue-collar workers, fishermen trying to make a living. Jesus was always noticing people. Second, he was always engaging people. Even people who didn't necessarily want to be engaged. Like the woman who snuck up and touched his robe and was healed. Or a tax collector who climbed up in a tree just to see Jesus. Or a Samaritan woman who was minding her own business at the well in the middle of the day. Jesus reached out to them and engaged them in conversation, not to embarrass them, but to affirm them, to let them know that they mattered. He was always engaging people. The third, he was always connecting people. He turned this unlikely assortment of men into disciples. And do you realize that the band that he put together, I mean, these guys usually hated each other. Matthew was a tax collector. Peter and James and John and Anna, fishermen, rough, tough. But he put them together. He connected them. And one day, they changed the world. And they did. And every one of them gave their lives for Jesus. Except John. Sorry, he was just boiled in oil and exiled to an island in Patmos. But he connected them. Jesus reached across cultural barriers. He engaged people like the Samaritans and the Gentiles, connected them. He invited women into his circle who normally had no place in the public eye. He invited a woman like Mary Magdalene. He was always connecting people. And fourth, Jesus consistently acted to meet people's needs. He fed the hungry. He healed the sick. He delivered those that were demon-possessed. Even when the needs were great, even when it got him in trouble, he still acted. Even when it got him in trouble, he still acted. At every turn, Jesus helped people take the next step on their spiritual journey. And sometimes that meant challenging them to follow him, like he did with Peter. Other times it meant fielding their questions and pointing them in the right directions, like he did with this guy named Nicodemus, who wasn't ready yet to believe. Jesus was always making peace. What do we do? Now, we've seen how Jesus lived as a peacemaker, but how do we do it? We're not Jesus. We're not scientists. We're not politicians. We're not authors. We're not recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize. So how then can ordinary people like you and I make peace in our world? there are a lot of people in our congregation that have had the opportunity to go to different parts of the world and be peacemakers. Randy and Beth said they visited Nick. Nick, he's been dealing with healing for Haiti for a long time. Been going down there on a mission trip. That's awesome. I can remember years ago when I would take youth group trips down to New York City. And I would take 20, 30 high schoolers and we'd hand out clothes to the homeless. We'd give them a hot cup of soup. We'd give them a sandwich. We'd give them blankets, things that they needed. I can remember going down and taking what I called mission trips with them for a whole weekend. And we would not only feed the homeless, but we would paint walls, we would help out. It was awesome. It was life-changing for those kids. And some of them, they went into mission work as a result. But we don't have to go on a mission trip to be a peacemaker. When we cross the lobby and introduce ourselves to someone who's sitting alone, we're being a peacemaker. When we invite somebody who doesn't have anywhere else to go on Christmas Day to dinner at ours, we're being a peacemaker. When you're from the United States and there's somebody from another culture and you extend your hand and you make friends with them, you're being a peacemaker. Patiently trusting God to help bring down barriers. That's peacemaking. Judgment isn't peacemaking. Sometimes we can even use the truth as judgment. This past Wednesday, we looked at a passage from Acts chapter 25 and 26, where Paul had warned these sailors who had him as a prisoner that they needed to avoid the storm and they shouldn't go and sail right away, but they did anyway. And when the storm came in, it was fierce. And it hit the ship so hard that they thought it was going to break apart. And they actually did have to run it aground. Now Paul stood among them and he said, I wish you would have listened to me. That's truth. And then he said, but let's get back to the sails. I'm in this with you. I wonder what would happen to relationships if after we gave advice that was not taken and rough times came as a result, we emphasized or we didn't emphasize, I told you so. And said instead, but I'm in this with you. What would happen? What would happen to that person? You know what reminds me of a parable that Jesus told a long time ago. About 3 guys, actually 4. One got beat up. He was on the side of the road. And 2 really religious guys came by, saw him, kept walking. 3rd guy, he was a Samaritan. Now you gotta understand, back then, a Samaritan, yeah. Jewish people walked 100 miles out of their way to avoid the Samaritan. But it was the Samaritan who stopped. And not only did he stop, but he touched this Jewish person. He healed his wounds. He bandaged him up. And then he took him to an inn and stayed with him through the night. And then the next day he paid the innkeeper and said, look, I'm going to come back. I got to go on my business. I'm going to come back, and whatever he owes, I will pay. Do you understand how in the face of these Jewish listeners that was? And then after that, because he was responding to a question that a lawyer had, who is my neighbor? And Jesus then looked at this man, this lawyer, this Jewish lawyer, and said, now which one do you think was a neighbor? Of course, the Good Samaritan. And then he just said, go and do likewise. Judgment is not peacemaking. And I wonder what would happen if we began to function as peacemakers. And when we interact with somebody, what if we're wrong? What if we were wrong when we judged somebody or called them out or gave them some piece of advice that was wrong? How do we usually respond? What if we were right in our action? What if we were right in our advice, but we were wrong in our response to them? You understand what I mean? Because some of us don't respond in kindness. We respond in judgment. And what if we were to say to that person, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Will you forgive me? How would that person respond back to us? And even if they were angry, even if they said, yeah, you were wrong, and we looked at them again and we said, yes, I was. Will you please forgive me? How does an angry person respond to that? If we took all the fire away from or all the wood away from the fire just then, right? We gave them nothing to burn. And they just sit there and they go, yeah, you were wrong, and it's okay, I forgive you. And even if they walk away angry, they're thinking about that response. That's being a peacemaker. That's being a peacemaker. We've become a peacemaker. We're not inciting an argument. Instead, we're quenching it. Listen, being a peacemaker doesn't mean you agree with everything the person believes or is doing, just that you love them. And our example of this was and is this guy named Jesus. The be attitudes have become the do attitudes. Right about now, some of you might be saying, wait a minute, all along you've been talking about these be attitudes and not the do attitudes. Peacemaking sounds a lot like doing to me. And you're right, if you're thinking that way, this is one of the first Beatitudes that really asks us to do something. But don't miss the fact that all these actions, recognizing, engaging, helping, they're outward expressions of an inward condition of a changed heart. A heart that's reaching for peace, for connection to other people. And if that's not the case, then our hearts are not transformed. Then all this peacemaking is not going to be very effective. It's not going to change until our heart changes here. Before we become people who reach other people, we have to become people who have Christ-like hearts. We have to be transformed from the inside out so that our hearts will naturally go that way. And unless that transformation takes part, it's never going to connect with us. We're not going to be the people that we want to be. And it doesn't matter how many sermons we hear or preach, we're not going to be peacemakers. Sometimes the direction the transformation comes from is different. God uses all things in our life to help us become peacemakers, to transform us to what he wants us to become, Christ-like. And it might come in the form of a broken heart, like it did with me, or a broken life, or a broken marriage. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It matters that when it comes, we run to Jesus. And the transformation starts to take place. And the things we do to know him better, to pray, reading the Bible, going to church, Bible studies, they all help. But they don't necessarily make us into a peacemaker, because a peacemaker is a doer. And making peace with ourselves, making peace with God, making peace with other people is an active word. The great thing about being a peacemaker, we don't have to be perfect. In fact, none of us are, so we shouldn't pretend like we are. We just need to be authentic and be real with Jesus and with others. I have a 19-year-old student. He's Jewish. He's been through some tough stuff. He's my student. But I call him my friend now. And we drive around and we talk about God. And we talk about traditions, Jewish traditions, Christian traditions. We talk about where is God in all of it. I don't try to convince him to become a Christian. I don't talk about how what he believes is wrong and what I believe is right. We just talk openly and honestly about God. And I hope one of these days he will embrace Jesus for himself. But until that time, I'm going to be honest about who I am, and I am. I don't hide the fact of what I believe, what I embrace. I just say it. But then I ask him, what do you believe? What do you think? I'm not an evangelist, but I love talking with people. And you know what? I think that's broken down so many walls. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I just think that breaks down walls. It's disarming. It's inviting. And I think that's the way Jesus was. He had that way with everybody he met, except maybe the religious elite, right? But he was always a peacemaker, breaking down barriers, breaking down walls. And in our world today, that's attractive and it makes other people hungry for what we have. I think that's maybe what Jesus was trying to say here when he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." And as we begin to think like that, it sparks other thoughts as we meet other people. And what I mean by that is we think in our head, do they know God? Do they know Jesus? Do they know that God created them and loves them? That He adores them? Our minds start to fill with those kinds of questions as we meet other people. And I think that's what Jesus meant, that we need to be peacemakers and build a bridge with them. And I believe when we begin to think like that, it brings love in our hearts for each and every person we meet. Even the angry ones. We walk away and we say, oh, God, why are they so angry? Lord, help me to love them. Give me the ability to build a bridge. Some of these people, they might be religious that we talk with, some might be very far from it, but we start to think about them, we start to pray for them, and we start to think, Lord, how can I help them? How can I share with them your peace, your joy? And that's God created in me and in you and in anyone. He's creating in us a reaching heart. He's stirring up something deep inside of us in those moments. And it causes us not to be just content to sit in our day and enjoy our shalom ourselves. But now, we want to extend. We want to reach others with it. When we have that kind of reaching heart beating inside of us, you can't help but to care more for people. You can't help but to share what you believe, sharing about who you love. You know what? I love my wife. I love my kids. And you can ask any one of my students, old or young, and they will tell you about my family. They will tell you about my wife. They will tell you about my kids. They might even tell you their ages and where they went to college and what they do, because I brag on them so much. I can't help it. They're part of who I am. I love them. It just spills out of my mouth. When our hearts are undivided and we are in love with Jesus Christ, we're going to find that it just spills out of our mouth. We can't help it. We're going to brag on them. It's not going to be an effort to talk about it. And we're not, and we don't need to talk at people. I'm not talking at my students. When I'm talking about my family, I'm just talking about my family. I'm not trying to convince them to love my family, to love my kids. I love them. I just talk about them. I think that's what's going to start happening naturally with us, with Jesus. We're going to look at other people the way that Jesus looked at other people. Jesus never hid who he was. He just was who he was. It's an amazing thing that takes place in us. We start to always look for ways to bring people closer to Christ and closer to one another. Are we prepared to ask God to change our hearts so that we can become instruments of his peace? And that's what the cross is all about. Peace with God, peace with others. And we have the ability to allow him to flow through us to others. We can be peacemakers, even in our own little bubble. Wherever we find ourselves, we can share with others the shalom that we experience. And that's what we celebrate in communion, each and every week. The peace that he's given to us, and the peace that we can give to others. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons and daughters of God. Before we share our elements together, just let me pray. Father, we just thank you for your word. And I just pray, Father, as we dwell on who Jesus was and is, that you would continue to transform our hearts and make us into peacemakers. In Jesus' name.